Well, we were hearing there from Luke about the hostages. But of course, although the families of those hostages are so relieved to have their loved ones back, they will know that after such a traumatic experience, it might be very difficult for them to readapt to some kind of normality. And many of the hostages are learning that their mothers or fathers, grandparents or siblings were killed in the October the 7th massacre. And so specialists have been advising the families on how they might help those released to cope now that they are back in Israel. Well, to discuss all this, I'm now joined on the line from Nashville in Tennessee by Jonathan Metzl. He is a psychiatrist and sociologist at Vanderbilt University. First of all, I want to thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Metzl. Thank you so much. I don't know if it's possible to separate the two traumas, witnessing what happened on October the 7th, that massacre, and then the subsequent being held in packed captivity. How will people who witnessed, saw that massacre on October the 7th, how will they cope with having that in their minds?
Well, I think you're exactly right. If you're asking about the hostages, it's almost unimaginable. I mean, I'm a psychiatrist. We have a full literature on responses to trauma. We have a literature on responses to hostage taking, but I don't think there's really a literature for seeing your spouse or your child or your relative or your friend murdered and then immediately being taken into captivity. So having no narrative, in other words, no narrative about what happened. You're grieving while you're also fighting for your own life. And then we're learning more about the horrific conditions of this captivity for certain captives. And so processing that with a complete lack of information about what happened, or in some cases, direct disinformation. And so it's trauma on top of trauma. And then now that people are coming back, they're now going to learn the story about everything that's happened since then, and about what happened to the fate of their kibbutz or their relatives. And so it's really like almost three distinct traumas that are all coming down on people. And I think you're right that really time and patience and expert help and family support are all going to be so important, because again, I just can't remember times within the my experience of working in this field where people were dealing with three such profound traumas, and particularly since we don't even know what happened to them when they were being held hostage.
We hear that they're being given advice by specialists in Israel. What do you think they might be being told? What sort of advice might they be given?
When people emerge from these kind of situations, they are anxious, they are terrified. A lot of times they worry all the time that this kind of thing could happen again. They can be volatile or depressed or anxious, all the natural responses, in fact, responses that probably helped keep them alive when they were being held hostage. And so I think patience, support, calm, asking for help, community, all those things, I'm certain are going to be very important, in addition to whatever kinds of group process. I mean, people who have these kind of experiences feel like they've understandably gone through an experience that is almost unimaginable for people who haven't gone through it. And so talking to people who've been in situations like that down the road, I think it's important right now, as much as possible, to keep them out of the eye of the media, at least for now. And so all the things are happening, but I think it's also important to note that every case is different. People's conditions of captivity were different. People were taken hostage in different situations. And people are psychologically different. So I'm betting every case will be just a case-by-case basis.
And from what you know about these sort of situations, are there certain types of personality that cope better, perhaps, with captivity than others?
Well, again, it's hard to answer because we don't know the conditions of this captivity in particular. Did they have engagement with other hostages? Did they have interactions with the captors, the kidnappers? What were their conditions in terms of food, in terms of cleanliness? I think the main thing is did they often think they were going to die at certain points, which is often a trigger for post-traumatic stress disorder. So certainly I can say that, I know that soldiers were taken captive as well, and they probably had a bit more advanced training, of course, in terms of how to deal with these situations. But I mean, you're talking about like little kids and people's grandparents and people who've just seen their spouses murdered or seen horrific scenes of rape or things like that. And so I would bet that really, again, it's just really it's gonna matter. All these variables are going to matter in terms of kind of how people recover after something like this.
What sort of damage might they suffer? I saw something earlier about how some of them, the families, were being told to be careful about hugging relatives when they arrived, that they wouldn't be used to human contact necessarily immediately, and to be very careful about personal space. Is that often a symptom?
Well, again, all those things can be. I mean, you just think about the standard trauma response of what's called hyperreflexia, feeling like any noise is going to be an attack, feeling anxious. I certainly think that, especially if people were physically abused, that fears of touch can be triggering in a way. And again, I think that fear that this thing is going to happen again, never feeling safe, never being able to relax, to feel like you're safe. And again, they're walking back into a very tense situation geopolitically in general. It's not like they're going back to the Club Med or something. And so in a way, I just think, again, really, I think the importance that I want to stress is a case-by-case basis. We can certainly give general guidelines, but I think that really learning from people what their response is going to be important, again, because this situation is so unique and uniquely traumatizing.
And we're told sometimes that children are extraordinarily resilient. Do you think that they have a better chance than some of the adults of moving forward?
Again, it depends on their community support. I mean, kids can be very, very resilient. Again, I think it's going to take a true reckoning of what happened in this traumatizing situation. We know for sure. I mean, kids survived concentration camps and the Holocaust and came to live full normal lives. There was still some part of their psyche that was traumatized. So it's not like there's not a history of kind of overcoming this kind of thing. It's not like they're doomed for life. But again, I just think that so much will depend on what happened to them in captivity, what their memory of it is, and how they process that going forward.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for your thoughts, Mr. Metzl. Jonathan Metzl there, speaking to us from Nashville in Tennessee, from Vanderbilt University, a psychiatrist and a sociologist, with his thoughts there on how those hostages and their families might deal with the release from captivity.